I'm Rachmi from Indonesia. My presence today in Geneva is very important for our friends in Indonesia, especially for those people who are being criminalized by the Transnational Corporation's activities in Indonesia. For us, the resolutions 26.9 is really important in the middle of the uncertainty enforcement law in our country regarding many transnational corporations committed to human rights abuses to our peoples. In relation to that, I just want to share some story from Indonesia where we saw actually there are several patterns human rights abuses by transnational corporations in Indonesia, not only by violence, but also how they use tax avoidance practices as their activities, and then also how they use also the investor-state dispute settlement to bring our state in the international arbitrations. Yeah, so far, based on the database from our national human rights institutions, every year the cases, the complaints from the communities in relation to transnational corporations' activities increasing, and then especially from the private sector, mostly they reach almost 1,000 cases per year. So it means so much, a lot of numbers here. And 41% concerning of land disputes, and followed by labor issues in Indonesia. And of course, because we are very rich with natural resources, most of the cases related with plantations and then forestry and mining sectors in the forms of evictions, criminalizations, and even killings of the human rights defenders itself. Next. Okay, thank you. Yeah, one case that I will bring in our discussions today in relations with Freeport, because as you know, Freeport is a big mining companies that operate in Indonesia, and their activity is really controversial, especially in Papua, in Indonesia. And next. And actually, why this resolution is really important, because sometimes it's really hard to ask transnational corporations to respect to our national regulations. The case itself starts when our government tried to implement our mining law, number 4 of 2009, where in the law itself sets some obligations for the transnational corporations, such as the obligations to the transitions from the contract regime to become the licensing regime in our country. And second obligations is the obligations to the purifications and processing of the mining products before being exported. And of course, it's really hard for Freeport to follow the rules in our national regulations. And then Freeport, the negotiations start with the governments, but because Freeport itself not really satisfied with the process, then Freeport threatens our governments with at least two controversial activities. First, Freeport threatens our governments to bring the case to the International Arbitrations Court, where we know that some of experience from investor-state dispute settlements mechanisms is not really work for the state. 75% from the cases bring in the exits in in favor to the transnational corporations. And we see that the treaty itself trying to give pressures to our governments to not implement the law only for Freeport. So they ask privileged rights for not to obey to these implementations of this mining law. And the second, threatens by Freeport is if the governments not allow Freeport to export the concentrates, they will terminate thousands of workers of Freeport. And until now, 8,000 of workers in Freeport still striking for their rights. And continue. And yeah, some actions also taken by Freeport against the workers, not only terminate the workers, but also they block the health insurance. Because of their block the health insurance, there are already some victims on it, and then block the bank account. And this is the results of Freeport workers, Freeport actions against the workers. Until now, there are already 10 months strikes by the workers in Freeport, in Papua, and in Jakarta. There are the results: 16 dead, 19 arrested, 10 tortured, 9 detained, and 2 suicide because they cannot access the health insurance. And then so many children drop up from school, and that is the result from the treatments of Freeport because they insist to have their own privileged rights. Next. Yeah. And the other things also, Freeport, yeah. So the other thing is the state losses because Freeport didn't pay tax. Freeport only wants to pay based on the contract signed by the government and Freeport, but we have our law. When the government have a new law about numbers of royalties that Freeport must pay to the governments, there is an increasing of percentage, but Freeport doesn't want to follow the new rules. That is why if we calculate it, and some organizations in Indonesia have been trying to bring the case to the court in national in our national court, but we lost it. We counted the state loss will be $256 million because Freeport didn't want to pay the tax based on the national regulations. And they also don't want to pay the tax, water tax in Papua because the local government in Papua released the new regulations about the price of the tax where Freeport used for their activities, but Freeport also didn't want to pay it. The local governments already bring the case to the National Administration Court, but they lost also. So that is why we calculated that Freeport should pay 3.4 trillion rupiahs for the tax issues. Next. And that is actually, it's really important to see that the corporate, transnational corporations' activities on human rights abuses through the several practices like in tax and then how they're using also the investor-state dispute settlement. Therefore, we need a treaty actually that can touch all aspects, not only on the violence sides, but how the binding treaty itself can touch the instrument like tax treaty and trade investment agreement. As you can see in Indonesia itself, we had experience with Newmont, where actually Newmont is a United States, American-based mining company, but they use bilateral investment treaty between Indonesia and Netherlands, where we know that Netherlands is also part of the tax havens, where Newman used it as their base to sue our government. So it's like the tax treaty actually should be part of the treaty itself. And then of course, trade investment agreement is really important to see how these transnational corporations use these agreements to more monopolize, to more exploited and control our economy through these agreements. And my conclusions is we need the draft text that the treaty compiled by the Global Campaign, where one of this chapter has included an obligations of official international economic and financial institutions and regarding trade and investment agreements. And that is, we also hope that in the fourth sessions of the treaty binding could have positive results in our works for so long. Thank you.